Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ruck Up Buttercup. It's just me today, but I have a guest on. We have Ruth and Kramer. She goes by Anne. If you've been part of Pillar, you might have seen her at one of the last events this last year. But she has written this beautiful book for us military spouses called You Belong. We're going to go over that a little bit, but first I'm going to go ahead and let Anne introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her background and her history in the military, as well as like being a military spouse.
Thanks, Sabrina. Again, my name is Ann Kramer. I served in the military for almost 9 years in the Army and met my spouse while serving and did dual military spouse for about 2 years and decided to get out and go on to school to become a social worker. So I ended up being a military spouse for about 11 years. And I say speak in past tense because I'm now a retired military spouse since 2021, but I still feel as if once you are one, that you always are one. It's like deep down inside. And I just have a special love for the military spouse population to be able to give back to them because of how many military spouses helped me in my journey. So now, I'm a therapist now, and I help people work through their trauma, military veterans. And thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm right on that same page with you. Like my husband, as everybody knows, he does civilian side, and it is different. Like luckily, this installation that we're at here at Fort Huachuca has felt a little bit more like inclusive as far as like there's a lot of contractors that work here to help teach and stuff, so they're kind of used to us being part of the military community still. But there's been bases where we were at, like Fort Bragg, where we're not even allowed to get passes on the base because we're not military. So it was a really weird like, hey, you're kind of still part of the community, but not. And especially having founded Deployed Love and being part of this big part of the military community and being part of the nonprofit sector who does support the military community, it was really odd to be like, hey, you can support us, but we don't really support you. And that was just like a okay. So it was always kind of a challenge. Like I had to get visitor passes for 30 days if I wanted to go on base for anything that they were hosting. And it just it is an odd transition. But I feel like we've talked about that with a lot of guests where once you're part of the military community, though, you still are always going to be part of it. I feel like the veteran community, until you're part of it, you don't realize, but it's basically the same thing, just a bunch of people who are no longer in the active duty realm. And I love what you do. I've kind of thought about doing that in the past. I just don't. It's a huge transition. I feel like that'd be a lot of school, a lot of learning. But I do come to find that like a lot of veterans, and I think it's because I grew up with my spouse, and so I was really young when he was really young in the military. So all my friends are veterans, right? So like that was who we hung out with, and I feel like they come to me just the same as they would any other veteran friends, right? Because I have not the active duty experience, but like the experience of being part of the military community for so long. And I find them coming to me for guidance, the veterans that are kind of like having a hard time. And I'm like, I don't have any like training to help you. And I don't know how to help you. And I feel really bad because some of them in our small community where I grew up in Nebraska don't have that veteran community around them. And so I'm one of the few people that they're like, oh, I associate you with the military community still. Like, hey, I need some help. And it's like, oh man, dude, I don't know. I'm like trying to give him like help, but I'm like, you're so far out in the middle of nowhere too. So it's to be able to actually be trained and you've gone to school and you've learned so much to help veterans. I think it's such a cool job. I think it's so many people need it. And I think that they need more people like you to be able to do the position. But it is, like I said, it's kind of daunting. Like what got you into like changing completely to that career field?
I think what the main point of what helped me to decide social work was what I loved so much about the military was helping the soldiers I worked with their problems outside of the military. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they can't handle what's going on outside of their job, then they're not really present. They may be physically there, but they're not mentally there. And so the higher I went up in my rank and the different responsibilities that I started to have, I worked in the IT field. I did not like that. I started to realize, like, wow, I really don't like this aspect of my job, but I like the
Mm-hmm.
job of taking care of people. And so that helped me to lead into, yeah, I looked for social work and I looked at psychology and I really kind of balanced out what would I be doing and how would that bring me joy. So I really think it's so important for all of the spouses to really think about what is it that you like in your day because then you can find what profession aligns with that. And then it's like you're getting paid to do something that you actually really love.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that I can't wait to use your book to kind of like really dial in and figure out what that is, because in the past I've always thought it was creative outlets, and I do have a very creative side. Like I really enjoy that and I would like to help better. And so it's like I need to figure out how I can do both things. I think maybe because I've tried to do creative things and do like social media marketing and stuff, and it isn't quite what I want. Like it's there, like I'm getting some of those aspects, but not it's not really helping anybody, and I really don't care about like selling products. I don't care. Like I'm good at it, but do I like doing it? It's not really what I want to do. So I need to use your guidebook so we can kind of guide into that a little bit. So I have it here for you guys so you can see. This is her book, You Belong. This is so much more than I thought it was going to be. I was telling her that before I got on. Like I expected it to just be kind of like a self-help book where you just kind of read through. But every single chapter has journaling, has I mean, it's really written to the military spouse. You can tell us a little bit more about this, I guess.
So there's two reasons or two people I wrote this for, because many people ask you, like, who did you write your book for? Well, number
Mhm.
one, I definitely wrote it for myself. I went down this journey of exploration more of when COVID started to happen, because a lot of my experiences were coming back to me in the times that we're just sitting and waiting and trying to figure out what's happening with COVID altogether. And so for me, it was a chance to really reflect on my experiences as being a woman in the military. And then now giving up that aspect of who I was to be a military spouse and to serve other people. So it gave me that time to reflect. But then I also realized that, wait a minute, like, how could I share what I'm writing, these lessons, and give it to that woman who finds herself in that same position that I was in, the similar experiences, giving up aspects of who you are for another person. No one really understands that more than the women that have gone through that. So I felt like that was the ultimate thing that I could do for other military spouses, is to be vulnerable about what I went through so that hopefully they can learn from those things and know how to face them when they're in the same situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a lot of why we do the podcast and everything too, is it's just like, hey, here's our stories. Because I think especially when I was a young spouse, like when we first got in, you think, oh, well, I'm the only one going through this. I'm the only one who's had to deal with that. And that's so not true. Like the military, like we all have our own stories and our own like experiences being part of the military community. But it all kind of weeds down to being very, very, very similar stories because deployments all feel kind of similar, and PCSing is always going to have the same storyline, and like all these things, that changes that we all go through are all very similar. They're not the same, they're really not, because I've definitely heard stories where you're like, wow, like that's not something I would have ever expected. But we're kind of on the same page, and for you to write a book where you're like, hey, I know it feels like you're the only one going through these things, but really you're not. Like we all sacrifice. I think that's a big part of what your book is about, is like the sacrifice of being a military spouse, and like what we tend to give up and what we don't really have to give up in being a military spouse. So that's where kind of like, where do we start with this book? Like, are we meant to read all the way through it? Is it something that you just kind of find the parts that are more important? Where do you think of that?
So the book does tend to be chronological, like starting from when I first exited the military. And so another reason why I wrote this, or why I decided to publish it besides keeping it to myself, was I went to an employment class in 2014 in Fort Bliss, Texas. This is one of the first activities I participated in as a military spouse, because that still felt very foreign to me. Like no one told me, like, what am I exactly supposed to do as a military spouse? Like, what does that mean? So I went to this employment class, had newly graduated with my master's in social work, and they teach you about how to write your resume, all the websites that you need to post to. I don't even think they were fully talking about networking at that point. But no one really had the conversation with us about how hard it was going to be, how hard being immersed in a new culture as a military spouse, what that actually feels like. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to think, like, where do we have those conversations? It's just lacking. Like we don't talk about what actually happens to you when you're in that process. And so that's why I felt like it was so important, because if we can open up those conversations, it helps us to understand where everybody's coming from, and we can be more empathetic to each other in those struggles.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think and it definitely comes from two different directions. Like you were saying, you came from active duty, so transitioning to a military spouse is really strange in that way because you relate more to the active duty people, and you're like, oh, I don't understand how to just be the spouse. We hear that all the time. We've had a lot of veterans on, and it's like it is a whole other level. But then also, as my experience coming in at 19 and having only really known my teenage life, right, like college and thrown into like, hey, now you're a wife and here's a house and you need to do all this insurance stuff and you need to like was also like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, and you need to attend all of these meetings at your husband's unit and you need to get to know the spouses. And it's like, that's so overwhelming. It is. They kind of just throw you in. They're like, hey, you need to get part of the FRG. You need to get involved. You need to be, it's like, where do you even begin? I don't even know who I am yet. I was 19. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. And you're telling me I'm now a wife and like this important part of an FRG and there's a deployment coming up and like there is. I feel that so much. Like when you get thrown into military spouse life, it's just like, hello, you should know what you're doing. And as I've gotten older as a military spouse, I've realized we kind of are the problem a little bit ourselves too, though. Like when the new people come in, you just expect them to know what to do. They get on the ground and they're just going, and there isn't, like you're saying, there isn't that conversation of like, where do I start? Like, what do I do?
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's kind of chaotic, and I appreciate it though because I think that we need that kind of resilience. Like we need to learn how to like work on our feet and kind of figure out where we are also because not always are we gonna have that guidance. I know that that's a lot of why deployed love exists is I've had really amazing FRGs when I was young, but then there were times where there was no FRG and you have no idea what's going on within the unit unless your husband's really good about communicating. And then there's now a lot of it is transitioned to soldier led FRGs. And so it's not the same as what it used to be, where it was like a lot of spouses taking care of spouses. So having something like this that even if we could get these into FRGs would be great to be like, hey, here's a good starting point. Like, even if this isn't career related, like, right? Like, if you just want to know, hey, what is it like to be a military spouse? Where do I start learning and growing myself? Because I think that's the biggest topic is we are still humans and we still deserve to have careers. We still deserve to live our lives too. We sacrifice so much for following and like giving up our jobs and changing and that's kind of your big stitch in this is like you can still have a job and you can still change every time you move.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where how do you kind of like we talked about like managing your expectations. I know there's a whole chapter in here. I haven't gotten that far, but like how to have the expectations of being able to be your own self in your own career, but like also knowing that you're gonna have to change duty stations and change the way things run each 2 to 3 years.
Hmm. I think the topic of expectations is very important, especially for young spouses, because sometimes we don't learn how to do that even as a child growing up. Our parents don't teach us how to set the expectations for ourselves. So that's where I kind of got lost, is that I made my expectations of what I was supposed to be doing off of how I saw other military spouses functioning when I was in uniform. So it was like very removed from knowing their life. Actually, it was just what I saw when they came to meetings and functions. So I tried to step into this role of the things that I had seen modeled to figure out if that's what I'm supposed to be doing. But I didn't actually ask my husband what he expected of me. So that, or, that's an important conversation to have from the beginning, is to ask our spouses, like, what do you expect from me as a military spouse? Do
Mm-hmm.
you want me to help volunteer with some of the fundraising? Do you want me to be attending these meetings? Of course, like, there has to be compromise, because there may be things that you want to be involved in and your spouse may not want you involved at all. But you're not moving to these places to be isolated. You need connection. And so having that conversation of what do you want, what do you expect of me to be involved with in the FRG or in the unit, and coming with a common ground. Because I started to get very much wrapped into the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing, and lost myself many, many times. And then my husband said, without me even asking, he's like, I don't expect you to do these things. Like, if you
Right.
don't like it, don't do it. And I'm like, oh, it was like
No.
I needed to it was like I needed to hear that, but we never even, it just went through a lot of things that I didn't need to end up with that conclusion of like I don't have to do the things that I don't want to. And
Yeah.
that is the major lesson that all military spouses need to take, is that you decide. You decide, but have that conversation with your spouse.
Yeah, and I think especially as a mom, it kind of also you end up volunteering for so many other things outside of FRG, whether that's scouts or helping at the schools, and it you don't have to. I do think that that was the FRG, the first FRG I was involved in with. I became the treasurer. I don't think in any mind that a 19-year-old should have been the person doing that in the first place. I don't know how we got there, but nobody else was volunteering, and I felt like you said, like following what everybody else was doing. This is what was expected of someone that was part of the FRG. And he was deployed, and they convinced me that they needed me to do it. And I didn't enjoy it either. Like, it wasn't something that I was like, but I felt like I needed to. And so I was at all these fundraisers and I was doing all these things while he's deployed, and I'm super busy. And maybe that helped, obviously, because back in the days of 2009 or whenever that was during the major deployments, he was gone for a whole year. And it was a
Mhm.
huge, like, who am I type of year, because I was young and I was just alone on an island. We lived in Hawaii, and I was nowhere near anybody I knew. And all of my friends were his friends. And so they were all deployed with him. And it was just kind of like, okay, well, I guess the FRG is where I belong. This is what I need to do. And it wasn't. And I think it was good that after that year, I never volunteered again. It just wasn't for me. Like, I didn't need to be part of the command. I didn't need to be part of any of that. Like, I know at some point that some military spouses kind of get voluntold, like they have to do it because of their husband's rank and stuff like that. And that's a whole other story. And that's kind of a lot of why you don't have to do it, because there's already going to be people who have to do it, right? And so it's the same with parenting, though. Like, I feel like a lot of moms get so wrapped up in, like, well, everybody else is helping with scouts and everybody else volunteers at the school, and so I need to do this, I need to do that. You don't have to. Like, you yeah, it kind of feels like an expectation because there's so many people that do it, but it's not really required, and it's not always even in the best interest of your kids. Like, I think when I helped with my daughter's scouting, it actually held her back, because when she's around me, she's a lot more introverted and she's very, like, codependent. So I feel like if I hadn't been in that situation, she might have sprouted a little bit more into her scout troop and been a little bit more herself at the meetings, versus the experience that I had where she was hiding under tables and acting super odd. And I was like, this is because I'm here. And I knew that. And it's like, I shouldn't have been volunteering. And you can say no. And I think there's a lot of moms that just don't. They can't say no, and then they overcommit. And then they're just like you were saying, lose yourself in these positions because they're like, I just committed to it, and I thought this is what was expected. And yeah, having that conversation, we always talk about open communication with your spouse. They probably don't expect it. Certainly
Mhm.
don't think my husband expected that from our first duty station. I don't. I think he probably thought it was rather odd as like a PV2 having to hang out with the commander's wife, because we got signed up for some, like, I think we did some like obstacle course military spouse thing where we had to basically do like a baby basic training, and it was a contest, and I was like with the commander's wife, and he was just like, this is so weird that I had to hang out with the commander at like 19. So like I'm sure it probably put him in also really weird situations where, like, had we had a conversation, he'd probably been like, you really don't need to do that. So yeah, definitely knowing like that communication is going to help with your expectations, because you will put yourself in situations. I know it's not just a one person, one spouse does that thing. It's a lot of people put themselves in these situations that they don't really want to be in because they think that that's what's expected of them.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, if you find yourself asking the question, like, why am I doing this? Like, that's a good question to ask yourself and to
You're like, really?
answer for yourself. Yes.
Yeah, it is for sure. So another one of the chapters that you wanted to talk about was self-doubt, and I think that kind of goes into like being unsure of yourself even after you've like gotten your training and stuff, and like knowing that you're doing the right thing, but is it the right thing for like you and your husband's career and everything like that?
Yeah, this one kind of goes along with the experience you have by moving to new locations. And I love that you said you lived in Hawaii because that was one of our last duty stations was in Hawaii. And the self-doubt came along with the culture that I was being immersed in. I worked in the community, so working in the community is very different than working on a military installation. And knowing that not every community is going to receive you well.
Mm-hmm.
Military spouses do so much for the communities that they get put into, but not every community is receiving of that. It's unfortunate. I just think that we just need to give each other a chance to see how we can support each other. So the self doubt comes up with the way that you may be perceived or the way that you're treated from other people in the community that are outside of the military community. And the main message that I want everyone to take away, whether you read this book or not, is to know that you need to tell yourself, I belong. Despite what anyone else says or does to you, you were brought to the area you are in for a reason. You were
Mm-hmm.
sent there on orders or you got a job if you're not in the military, and you belong no matter what anyone else says. And so if you can just remind yourself that if you're in a situation of self-doubt, you're not going to have the answer to every situation that you're in. You're not. That's what life is about. We learn through our failures and for through self-doubt and through fear. That's how we learn, but always reminding yourself that I belong so that you continue to show up and that you put yourself in these situations where other people may be telling you or showing you that you don't belong. That's like the main point I want to hit home about the self-doubt. That's natural to have self-doubt, but the more that you put yourself in those situations and the more experience you gain, that will start to drift to the back.
Yeah. And if Ashley had been on, she would have told you, she had this story about like not being hired for a position that she very specifically was qualified for because, and I did get to a part of the book where you talked about that, where like, because of the, well, how long will you be here? Like, I know you're
Mhm.
only temporary, and they don't want that. And it's not always the case. Like, sometimes we do get extended, and we could have been there for 6 years, but they're not even willing to give you the chance. And that's where that self doubt I think really creeps in. Is like, well, I know I should be able to get this position. Like, I know I'm overly qualified. There's no reason to not. And then finding them being like, I don't think we can do it, and just for those reasons, like because you're a military spouse, and you can't hide it on your resume. I mean, a lot of our positions look like, well, why did you only work there for a year? Why did you move after 2 years at this job? And it's really hard to write a resume that doesn't show that you're a military spouse. And I want to know, in your opinion, is do you think it's better to not mention that you're a military spouse when you're going into like the job interviews with different companies, or and like let them just kind of figure that out through like looking at your resume, or like lead with it? Because we've kind of talked about it on our side. Like, I think military spouses are great. Like, I think we are organized, we're resilient, we do a lot of things that a lot of other spouses don't do, and I think that that's an asset. But it does kind of put that on there when you're having an interview where like, hey, she's temporary, hey, she may not be around for long.
Yeah, it's really tough. I would think that if you want to go in and share that piece about you, because there's always that question, tell me about yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
always just prepare that ahead of time. If you are going to use that attribute about you, is have the strengths lined up about why that makes you the best choice for that position. Because I think that it has made me a better person. It has made me a better employee.
Mm-hmm.
I've been exposed to many different work environments, so I know that there's ways to do things. And it has helped me be a better asset for my team. So, as
Right.
long as you bring that in and you sell it and you own it, that should not be a problem. I mean, that's not something that my employment personally discriminates about. So, if it is something that you're proud of, I think you should come to it and share it.
Yeah. And we've kind of suggested in the past also looking for jobs that are run by veterans and things like that, because they understand how that is an asset, because it is an asset. Like you're saying, we also have like this major culture around us, right? Like we also know so many different people from so many different areas, and we have a huge network. I know personally my network is huge. Like I really, if I needed to pull strings, could pull strings because I know people all over the entire world at this point. And I think that helps a lot in a company to have those kind of an asset like that. But then it is very like imposter syndrome. Like, do I belong here? Like, is this going to be something that I want? And you mentioned Hawaii, and definitely, if you've ever been stationed there, you kind of know the culture of Hawaii, and it is definitely a do I belong here? They try to very indicate that you do not belong here. It wasn't so bad because I was a teenager when I went there in like early 20s. So like at that point, it was still very like college. You know how college kids are kind of get along with everybody. But I could definitely see if you had kids and you were there older, that culture would definitely stand out a lot more.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that was a challenge starting your career there and having to, yeah. But as part of that like self-doubt is imposter syndrome also though, like also knowing you're really good at what you do and being told that you're not is kind of, or thinking that you're not, I guess more, it's more mental. I definitely was told that I wasn't at one point, which was super annoying, as because as an executive director that's a huge position, and that was what I was
Mhm.
for Deployed Love for a while. And it was like I founded a nonprofit. I know, like, to get to this point, I had to learn a lot of information and then have people be like, "Oh, well, this is just your side job, right? Like, or this is just your other little thing." And it's like, then you sit there and you're like, "Oh man, maybe I don't know what I'm doing." Like, I did just kind of teach myself all these things. I'm like, do I know what I'm doing? And imposter syndrome really is hard to get through. Like, to be like, should I keep doing this, or should we hire someone else who knows what they're doing? Or because it's a hard job, and to know what you're doing is basically not taught. You don't really learn how to become an executive director. That was just kind of thrown in there like, hey, you want to start a nonprofit? Well, you're gonna have to be in charge of it. Like, especially starting out, you don't have funds. You can't pay to hire anybody else. Like, you better figure out how to do it. And yeah, that I've definitely hit imposter syndrome, and it was hard. It was a hard time to get through. And but then you do have all these people. I always have to look back and be like, oh, but over the last 8 years of working for this nonprofit, I've had 50, 60 people volunteer. That's where it comes down. It's like these people
Mhm.
believe in what I'm doing to the extent that they're giving their time for free for our organization. Clearly I'm doing something right? Like, it has to be something is going right, otherwise I would have no volunteers. So you have to think about those silver linings of things like that, even though it is hard to get out of that, like that mind frame.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that you've experienced that, Sabrina. I tend to think that people that have to minimize your role or minimize the things that you're doing, that they have some type of insecurity. So you could always find a way, because I write about the questions no one talks about is one of my sections, because people will ask questions because they're trying to get to something behind, there's something behind the question that they want to get to. And so like the insecurity part of it is, is there something you're concerned that I won't be able to handle?
Mm.
Or, like try to put it back on them. I would probably go around that route. Is just there's usually insecurities, and what you have done, what you've accomplished is amazing. And I think it's definitely something to be proud of.
Yeah, I can definitely see it as he was insecure. He was an older male, and we were on a radio show, and he was just like, "Well, I'm glad you guys are doing this as your like little side thing." And luckily, the girl who was there on the interview with me was like, "Oh no, honey." She's like, "No, this is a full time job. We work all day, every day, and like, and she's volunteering for Girl Scouts, and she's doing this." She was like, threw it back in his face, like, "No, you're not gonna end insult us on like public live radio. Like, what is wrong
No,
with you?"
no.
Yeah, it was like, dang. But it doesn't feel good when people do that. And it's like, just be nice to people in general. Just if someone's doing like volunteer work is hard, and nobody gets paid in the nonprofit sector until you're like some big, fancy, big CEO type thing. Like, it's all just because genuinely I care about the military community. That's why me and Ashley both do this. It's we don't get paid. There's not a penny that goes in our wallet. Like, we are here to help other people. So like, be nice. Like, it's so much work. Like, I'm so glad that she took over executive director, because oh my gosh, the amount of work that like you're running an entire company. You have people under you, so many people. It's so much work. But then kind of we can go into the next topic is leaning into your connections though. I think that has made us so strong because we were part of the military community. Both of us have over 16 years in the military sector. We're able to find people, amazing people like you, like people that have these connections, and we're able to come on and have a show where we support military across every board. Like we definitely have now transitioned more into helping veterans, and because we're on Reach Across America Radio, which is really fun that we know half of our audience now is veterans. And so we're not only able to just help military spouses, we're able to find resources that are available to everybody. So that's the coolest part about being part of the military community, I think, right? Is having those connections and being able to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I think the connection part also leans into your question about whether you should share if you're a military spouse or not, because I think if you know people in the community of the employment that you're trying to get, ask them. Like ask them, "Hey, what's the environment around talking about being a military spouse?" Because there is a Facebook page for mental health clinicians for military spouses that I've had people say, "Hey, I need an internship." I'll flat out post on there, "Hey, these are ones that I recommend that you steer away from."
Okay.
Like, so definitely use your connections to get to what it is that you're looking for. Whether
Yeah.
you know them or whether you personally know them or not, put
Yeah.
yourself out there because we have all been in that position where we don't know anybody and you only get what you ask for. So just ask.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think that I use LinkedIn a lot for that. Like, hey, I can see, hey, this person works within this organization and I'm just going to ask. And it works out all the time. Like, Ash is like, I don't know how you get all these guests on our show. I'm like, because I just ask them. I'm like, I find them from something else and I'm like, oh, this would be so great. And I just ask. And most people are always willing to talk about themselves. They're willing to tell their story. And why not? It also gets them in front of other people. So, like, yeah, just use your connections to kind of just get where you want to go with things. And that it's always worked. Like I've never had an issue with it. And it's funny because she's just kind of learning as becoming the executive director, like how to really use that because I've had previous executive directors from other nonprofits sit down and literally show me their budget. So we knew how to build our budget. Like they'll give you information because what does it matter? Like, but you have these really cool connections. And that's kind of where I talked about like also looking for jobs within veteran owned companies are
Mhm.
very helpful because they already are aware of what you provide. Like they're aware that, yeah, maybe she's only going to be here for 2 years, but that's 2 years of amazing marketing skills, or that's 2 years of someone who's going to work at the front desk at the Veterans Institute or volunteer or help or whatever, that like will know what those people are going through. And that's better than just finding someone out of the community who doesn't really know anything about veterans. Like that alone is a huge resource. So like using that, and it doesn't have to be for veterans, but just ran by veterans is a huge help. Like I've definitely
Mhm.
noticed that's where we look for donations is always through veteran organizations and stuff like that because we know that they get it. They're going through the same thing or have been through the same thing that our community is also dealing with. And that's a great connection too. Even if it's not something like you said, you may not know them personally, but if you have enough of a connection or enough things that you have in common, it's okay to ask. I mean, what's the worst is a no. It's just a no. And then it's like, okay, and you move on. But use those connections. And it can be, I think that it can also be through your spouse's connections. I think if you have that conversation with them and they have active duties, like people in a different area where you're moving and they already have connections there, that it's okay to use their connections too. As long as you have that conversation with your spouse, being like, hey, I'm going to reach out to so and so at the new installation. I know that they work within MWR or whatever, the position that I want. Is that okay? And then making sure you ask first so you're not just like using their name or their rank or whatever to get a job, but you can use your spouse's connections too because they've earned them just the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the last kind of topic that we were going to talk about was you have this uncovered lessons, like things that like you've learned along your route, right? Like of your career and why you wrote a book and like why we're at this point in your life.
Yeah, so there's a couple key points that I pulled from the book that go into greater detail if you dive into it. But one lesson that I have taken from my experiences is don't accept the first no as your final answer. One big one was when I was getting out of the military in closer to January of 2013. I applied to go to get my graduate degree and they were saying that, oh, you can only go to school if you start in the fall. So most programs, they want you to start in the fall. And so that didn't align with my
Yeah.
timeline. But I said, well, there's got to be someone else can talk to about this. And so I talked to someone above the admissions, and they let me come into the program. I told them how I could make it happen. And another lesson I want to hit home to military spouses is that finding a way to recognize the power and worth that you bring to the table as a military spouse. Even nowadays, there are so many new things that are happening for military spouses, especially in the federal area. You're listed as a special category for many things. So your voice is just as important as the military service member's voice. Just speak up and use it. When you know that something isn't right, advocate for yourself. Another lesson is that disappointment is inevitable, but it doesn't have to hold you back. So I faced many times people told me no. And even after I pushed back, and just had people treating me disrespectfully, and many times just disappointed. And I just want you to know that that doesn't have to be where you stay. We can push past disappointment. We can lean into our connections. We can reach out to other spouses and veterans for help. That just because you're feeling that way in the moment doesn't mean you have to stay there, but it is part of the experience. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be the stopping point, though.
Yeah, and definitely in this economy and the things are there's going to be disappointments where you like really wanted a position and you don't get it or there's not funding for it. I mean, my husband right now is kind of looking for a new contract and it's really hard to apply constantly to positions and being like, I know I was qualified for that. And I think a lot of it right now is honestly they're having to post that they have positions, but they don't really exist. And I've had to tell them that I'm like, I don't think that these positions actually exist or that they even have the funding for them, but they have to, as a company, show that they have openings available. And I was like, it's not you. Like the fact is, if you have 16 years of experience in that exact position, there's no reason they wouldn't hire you. And if you're not even getting to interviews, I don't think that position exists. And he's kind of had to realize, like, oh, you're probably right. Like at this point, because if they're not even going to interviews, so it's disappointing because we kind of are currently at a location where we never expected to be. This isn't a job that we were hoping to ever do, but it was the first job that finally got offered to us after 4 months of not having a job. So we were like, okay, this is where we are. And so we've just been very temporarily living here. And that's also hard. It's a hard part of the
Mhm.
military. And as a veteran now, doing the civilian side is things can be even more temporary now than they were when we were active duty, where like you knew at least then you're guaranteed 3 years or 2 years, where now it's like, it's whenever that contract ends. Like that's how it happened to us. We were in Germany and our contract was just like, hey, this contract's ending. We were like, okay. And so life just changes and it's not what you expect. Like we definitely had expected other things from being part of the contract world where people are like, oh, well, I was in Germany for 10 years and we retired there. And that's not the economy anymore. Like that's just not how things are, like, especially with
Mhm.
government jobs. But we also go back to that, like knowing your power. You should use that. Like talking to you and like listening to you, you should use your skills as a military spouse in an interview. You should be like, hey, this is super important to me, and this is what I am and who I am. And you're going to get that side of me either way. Like, the reality is, like, there's no knowing me personally without knowing that I was a military spouse. Like, that's just, it's so much of like my background and so much of what I do at Deployed Love and so much of my community that it is would be odd to not. And I've definitely hit that boundaries at different places where we lived where like, hey, you're not from here. Like, especially here where we're at Fort Huachuca, it's a very, very tiny town. And most of the people who've lived here have lived here for their whole life, or they're old veterans who have retired here. And yeah, we definitely, they're like, hey, I want to be part of this homeschool community. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. And then they start talking about all their friends from high school and all these things. Do you remember this? Do you remember this old building? And it's like, yeah, you're not really being very inclusive. I have no idea what you're talking about. Something from 15 years ago. Like, and you just have to kind of be like, okay, well, I'll find where I belong. And that it does tend to be like, I'm like, okay, well, that means I'm going to go help with the volunteer at the VFW down here instead. I'm going to find my community somewhere else. Like, because that community still does exist and embrace the military community. I think that's the biggest thing we always have a message to military spouses is to embrace that you are part of it. because there's a lot of military spouses who are like, that's just my husband's job. I don't want to get involved, but like it's a huge asset. And it's a really good thing to be part of because the veteran community after you're out still exists and it's huge and they have things all the time. There's tons of free resources. Like be part of it. I think that it can be overwhelming. We talked about that. Like you may get voluntold or stuck in positions or volunteer yourself places where you don't belong. And it can be overwhelming to be a military spouse sometimes. And the expectations can be there depending on the installation, depending on your spouse. But I've also met some of the coolest people, like the coolest people that are part of the military community because we are just so open. We're open to being part of so many different backgrounds and being able to help each other through so many different things and the connections and the resources. And it's a pretty community, if I can say so myself.
Hmm. So I want to add, if people that find themselves in similar situations as your husband, like as a contractor or newly separated and still trying to find a job, that reach out to the VA. They have an employment center. Sometimes they have access to jobs that may not be showing up in the community. So there's no shame in asking for help. I just want to put that out there, that there are opportunities there. And I've seen some veterans get some amazing opportunities for the ones that put themselves out there. So don't forget that resource as well.
Definitely. I will definitely make sure he listens too because he is definitely frustrated at this point and it's hard. So, as we're kind of narrowing down at the end of this, we always like to ask former military spouses what their one piece of advice would be to like a new military spouse just getting into this whole world, this crazy world that we get thrown into. What would you be your one piece of advice to those spouses?
I think one piece of advice I would say to spouses listening in is that to have something for you. Have something that's like just yours, that only you have access to. It's not connected to the military, it's not connected to your children, it's something that's just for you.
Yeah, I love that. Like deployed love is kind of connected to the military, but I feel like it is my baby. It's my thing that,
Mhm.
and it's I built it because I wanted to have something that could go with me because I wanted a job that hey, it doesn't matter where I am. I've been in Germany since then, and like you just bring it along and still can be part of supporting and being part of that community no matter where I am. So it's nice to have your own thing and I feel like a full human because of it. Because I'm like, hey, this is my accomplishment that I did. I built this baby from the ground up. Like this is
Mhm.
my thing, and no matter what happens, even if it were to shut down in the future because nonprofit life is hard, like that's okay. Like I still took something and was like, hey, I want to do this, and I did it, and that feels like such a good thing for you to have because being a military spouse and just being a military spouse is kind of demoralizing, I guess, like to just feel like that's the only title I hold and that's the only thing. And like, it's okay. Like, if you are, especially if you have babies, like you're busy, that being a mom is a big title in and of itself. But once they get to an older stage, like my kids are like preteen land and I need something for me too. Like there needs to be something that's not just taking my kids to extracurriculars or going to my husband's unit stuff and you need to have your own thing. And it doesn't have to be anything huge, but just something where you can be like, "Hey, this is my time, my space,
Mhm.
my job, my whatever." Yeah. Wow. Do you
So
have anything to
Sabrina,
add?
yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure how much time we have, but if you don't mind, I'd just like to read like a paragraph from one of the sections that's specifically focusing on military spouses. And it's section 4, page 15. It's called the Wizardess. So you will find that a lot of the titles and stuff I have feminized it,
I love
so to
it.
say. So each section has a quote, and then I just want to read a small paragraph of, this is where I'm talking about the magic that military spouses hold. So you are unrepeatable. There is a magic about you that is all your own. And that's a quote from DM Dellinger. Military spouses are magical. Of course, all women are, but this section is to highlight this unique group of amazing women. Many military spouses have also served in uniform, and some still do. Military spouses are wizards, but yet they are the wizardesses. Military spouses are the true wizardesses behind the curtain, making all the magic happen while most of the time not being seen or recognized. Yet they keep going strong for the greater good of our service members and our country. They have so many tricks up their sleeves that most of the time they make things happen before others even know it needed to be done. I am amazed and in awe at all military spouses I've seen persevere and thrive despite the countless obstacles stacked against them. They are a breed of their own, one that I am honored to belong to. Military spouses will never be a carbon copy of each other. Each of us brings something special to the table. We all hold the priceless value of selfless service in us for the sacrifices made for our spouses. Those sacrifices may entail parenting alone while their service member is out in the field or has gone to another location for training or off to a foreign land in combat, all with the knowledge that some of those service members may never return. Other sacrifices include making home repairs and car repairs alone, or even having a child in the absence of their military partner. No amount of gratitude can fill those voids. Even so, I want to thank all military spouses for all that they do. I have a strong inclination that our service members would be in a world of hurt devoid of the presence of their spouses. I'm going to pause
Absolutely.
there, but a feeling what military spouses do, and it's many that they can't put into words. But I know that we would be at a loss without everything that military spouses do. And so if anything, if you pick up the book or, listen into the podcast, you will get a better understanding and gratitude for what you bring to this space. It's so important. It's priceless.
Absolutely. That's a great place to leave off at. If you guys are listening and you want to get a hold of Anne or are just looking for the link to this, it is going to be in our show notes. Of course, it'll also be on the website and in our blog and everything like that. So you guys will have plenty of ways to access this book. And I hope you guys do buy it. Like, genuinely, even as a veteran wife, this book is going to make a huge difference in my life. And I know that I cannot wait to sit down and actually like read through it and have a chance to journal, because there are topics in here where you really get deep into like how that is going to affect your life with if you don't like negotiate and realize these things in your life. So I think that what you've written is amazing. It's beautiful for our community, and the military spouses needed something like this. And so I will definitely be very excited for it to go out. You guys will have been hearing ads for it already on the podcast over the last couple of episodes. So we hope that you guys are picking up this book, because it's an essential to our military community. And I feel like it should be a workbook, like I said, that should be given out at FRGs to the new spouses, because it's like a workbook to figure out how to be a military spouse, but how to remain yourself. And that's beautiful. Like, beautiful. I appreciate it so much, Anne.
You're such a light, Sabrina. Thank you.
This has been so nice to meet you and to be able to have a chance to talk. And I cannot wait to work with you more in the future. And I hope everybody enjoyed the show. And as we like to say, rug up, Buttercup.